While the boardrooms in the American Midwest are drowning in debt and harvest reports are shrinking into a nightmare of corporate collapse, a different kind of fire is being lit on the edge of the Sahara. For decades, they told us that progress looked like a lab-grown seed and a foreign contract that slowly bled our land dry. But the mask has finally slipped. In the heart of Burkina Faso, under the steady gaze of Ibrahim Traoré, a $900 million declaration of war has just been signed, not with bullets, but with the very seeds that grow our future. This is the moment the West feared most. This isn't just a law, it's a structural shift in the global balance of power. Why would biotech giants and national security staff in Washington be triggered by a single vote in Ouagadougou? Yes, is it possible that the most dangerous weapon against neo-colonialism isn't a missile, but a handful of indigenous millet? We have seen our ancestors' clay pots replaced by corporate bags with foreign logos, turning our soil into a captive market. We felt the pain of seeing our children hungry while our farmers signed away their souls to companies that treat food as a bargaining chip. But today, the cycle of agricultural slavery is meeting its end. Traoré is betting $900 million on the sovereignty of the African stomach, and the old guard is absolutely terrified. They want you to believe this is reckless, but we know it's survival. Before we dive into how this one move is breaking the back of the global food monopoly, that you need to understand that this is for the fathers who can no longer afford to plant and the mothers who remember the taste of real land. Stay with us, because the truth about who really owns your plate is about to be exposed. Subscribe now, because the revolution will not be televised, it will be planted. The tragedy of Africa's agriculture didn't start with a drought, it started with a promise, the great deception known as the Green Revolution. For decades, the global powers and their local puppets whispered a seductive lie into the ears of our people, that African soil was backward, and that the only way to escape poverty was to embrace the modern science of the West. They arrived with glossy brochures and smiling faces, promising yields that would touch the sky. They spoke of miracle seeds that could resist pests and fertilizers that would turn dust into gold. But what they didn't tell you was that this wasn't an offer of help. It was a Trojan horse designed to hollow out our sovereignty from the inside out. This was agricultural slavery, repackaged for the 21st century. Think about the old guard, those previous administrations that traded our future for a few billion in aid and a seat at the table in Davos. They signed treaties they didn't explain to our farmers. They allowed NGOs to flood our villages with seeds that were patented, branded, and legally owned by corporations 5,000 miles away. These leaders were more interested in pleasing their masters in Washington and Paris than in the survival of their own people. Yet they watched as our traditional varieties, the ones our ancestors had perfected over 1,000 years, were pushed into extinction. They allowed a system to take root where the very act of saving a seed from last year's harvest became a legal crime. Can you imagine that? A farmer being treated as a thief for using what God and the earth provided. This was the trap. The Green Revolution was never about feeding Africa. It was about creating a captive market. When you buy their seeds, you must buy their fertilizer. When you buy their fertilizer, you must buy their pesticides. It is a closed loop of dependency that ensures every cent earned by an African farmer eventually flows back into the coffers of a multinational giant. If the rain fails, the company doesn't care. The debt remains. If the yield is high, the market prices are manipulated, and then the debt remains. This is how they kept us on our knees. They didn't need to colonize the land with tanks anymore when they could colonize the stomach with a patent. They gaslighted us into believing that our indigenous millet and sorghum were primitive, while their GMO hybrids were progress. But the mask has finally slipped. Ibrahim Traoré looked at these spreadsheets of misery and saw exactly what they were: a death warrant for our independence. He saw how the previous governments were essentially sales agents for foreign interests, allowing the soil of Burkina Faso to be treated like a laboratory for corporate greed. The $900 million seed law is the first time in our modern history that a leader has had the courage to say no more. No more asking for permission to plant. No more debt cycles that span generations. Traoré understands that the Green Revolution was a lie built on the bones of African farmers who were promised a future and given a chain. We are done being the testing ground for biotech experiments that leave our soil sterile and our people hungry. The soil is waking up, and the people are beginning to realize that the most modern thing you can do is to own the very beginning of your life, the seed. They called it science. We call it a scam. And today, the scam is over. Let's talk about how the snake entered the garden. It didn't come with a fence or a border guard. It came through a laboratory door under the guise of biotech innovation. This is the infiltration, the silent invasion of the GMO Trojan horse. When these multinational giants, the Monsantos, the Bayers, the Syngentas of the world, set their sights on the Sahel, they weren't looking to solve hunger. They were looking for a new territory to tax. They understood something very dangerous. If you control the code of life, you control the people who depend on it. They didn't just bring seeds. They brought a technological package that was designed to fail without their constant intervention. Imagine a young farmer. Let's call him Musa. Musa is hardworking. His soil is his pride, and he wants a better life for his children. One day, a representative from a development project arrives. They offer Musa a bag of seeds that promise to double his yield. It looks like a miracle, but inside that bag is a hidden contract. These seeds are often what we call suicide seeds, genetically modified or legally restricted so that they cannot be saved and replanted next season. In one single move, Musa's relationship with the earth is severed. He is no longer a guardian of the soil. He is now a subscriber to a corporate service. This is the ultimate global chess game. These seeds are protected by intellectual property rights, a fancy legal term used by Washington to ensure that African wealth flows one way, westward. It is the same mechanism they use with the US dollar. Just as they use the financial system to control global trade, they use seed patents to control global life. If Musa tries to save a few seeds to plant next year, the way his father and grandfather did for centuries, he is suddenly a criminal. He is stealing corporate property. Think about the audacity of that. A corporation in St. Louis or Leverkusen claiming ownership over a biological process that happens in a village in Burkina Faso. The mask has slipped, and we see it for what it is, the colonization of the very DNA of our food. The infiltration goes even deeper. These GMO seeds are engineered to only thrive when paired with specific, expensive chemical fertilizers and pesticides, products conveniently owned by the same companies selling the seeds. It's a vertical monopoly that makes the old colonial trade routes look like child's play. If Musa can't afford the chemicals this month, his miracle crop withers. He is forced to take a loan from a bank that is often tied to the same international aid organizations that push the seeds in the first place. This is the software of slavery. Your land is the hardware, but the corporations own the operating system. And just like a phone that slows down when you don't pay for the update, your farm becomes useless the moment you stop paying the white-collar masters in the West. The West has gaslighted Africa for years, telling us that we are food insecure because we are inefficient. But the truth is, we are food insecure because we are dependent. They spent billions lobbying our previous governments to pass laws that make it illegal for local seed banks to exist. They wanted to erase our history, delete our indigenous knowledge, and replace it with a barcode. They saw the Sahel not as a cradle of civilization, but as an untapped emerging market where they could dump their chemical waste and call it modernization. This is why the West is so alarmed by Burkina Faso's new stance. Because if Ibrahim Traoré proves that African soil can thrive without these corporate shackles, the entire business model of the biotech giants collapses. The $900 million isn't just for seeds, it's for the liberation of Musa's soul. It's about telling the world that our land is not a playground for your genetic experiments. We are reclaiming the code. We are taking back the software of our survival. The infiltration has been spotted. The Trojan horse is being burned, and for the first time in a generation, the farmers of the Sahel are looking at their hands and realizing that the power was always in the seeds they already owned. The era of the patent over the plant is coming to a violent end. In the chaotic theater of West African politics, where leaders are often bought and paid for before they even take their oath, One man has decided to rewrite the entire script, Ibrahim Traoré. To the Western media, he is just another man in a red beret, but to the streets of Ouagadougou and the dusty fields of the north, he is the captain of the soil. Traoré understood a fundamental truth that the old guard ignored for 60 years. You can have all the Kalashnikovs in the world. You can clear every insurgent from your borders, but if your people are still begging for bread from the very people who exploited them, you are not a sovereign nation. You are a colony on life support. This is the Traoré factor. It is the realization that true revolution doesn't start at the end of a barrel, but at the tip of a seed. When Traoré looked at the agricultural reports of Burkina Faso, he didn't just see numbers. He saw a strategic vulnerability. He saw how the global chess game was being played against his people. He realized that the reliance on patented foreign seeds was a leash, one that Washington and Paris could yank whenever they wanted to adjust Burkina Faso's foreign policy. While other leaders in the region were busy attending gala dinners in Brussels, begging for another round of food aid that only serves to depress local prices and kill local farming, Traoré did something radical. He redirected $900 million, not into luxury jets or Swiss bank accounts, but into the dirt. This isn't just a budget allocation. It's a ransom payment for the nation's soul. He is betting nearly $1 billion that the African farmer, armed with the wisdom of his ancestors and the support of a sovereign state, is more efficient than a biotech giant with 1,000 lawyers. This is where the old guard gets nervous. For decades, the political elite in West Africa functioned as middlemen for Western interests. They were the ones who signed the gaslight agreements, allowing NGOs to flood the market with GMOs under the banner of humanitarianism. Traoré has effectively fired these middlemen. By pushing this law, he has told the biotech lobbyists and the trade attaches that their Trojan horse science is no longer welcome. He is reviving the ghost of Thomas Sankara, the man who famously said, "He who feeds you controls you." Traoré isn't just quoting Sankara, he is executing the vision. He is building community seed banks that function like fortresses of freedom. He is deploying young agronomists to the front lines, not to teach farmers how to be modern, but to help them rediscover the resilience that was stolen from them. Now, let's be blunt. Nigeria is cooked if they don't follow this path. Much of the continent is watching Burkina Faso with bated breath. Traoré has shattered the myth that Africa needs permission to be self-sufficient. He is proving that when you stop the leakage of capital to foreign seed companies, that money stays in the village. It builds a floor that is resilient. It creates a system where a bad harvest doesn't mean a funeral, and a good harvest doesn't mean more debt. The West calls this protectionism or economic instability. We call it dignity. Traoré's strategy is a direct middle finger to the global food monopoly. He knows that the West is alarmed not because they care about African hunger, but because they care about African compliance. A nation that can feed itself cannot be sanctioned into submission, and a nation that owns its seeds cannot be bullied at the negotiating table. This $900 million investment is the most dangerous investment in the history of the Sahel because it removes the leverage that the empire has used for centuries. Traoré is standing on the ramparts, telling the world that the soil of Burkina Faso belongs to the people of Burkina Faso. He is the first leader in a long time who understands that the real battle for Africa isn't fought in the halls of the UN, but in the silence of the clay pots where the seeds are kept. The sovereign captain has made his move, and the global chess game will never be the same. This is about more than just millet and sorghum. This is about the right to exist without a foreign patent on your life. Traoré has drawn a line in the sand, and that line is green. But he is showing every African child that their future doesn't come in a branded bag from a multinational corporation. It comes from the very earth they stand on, provided they have the courage to defend it. The Traoré factor is simple. Feed the people, free the nation, and never, ever ask for permission to be great. To understand why a few sacks of millet in a village in Burkina Faso can cause a panic in the high-rise offices of Washington, D.C., you have to stop thinking about farming and start thinking about power. For the last half-century, the world has operated on the logic of the petrodollar, the idea that global trade, energy, and survival must be filtered through the American financial system. But there is a second, even more invisible layer to this dominance: the seed dollar. In the global chess game, food is not just a commodity, yet it is the ultimate tool of diplomatic and economic leverage. If you control a nation's energy, you can stall their cars. But if you control a nation's seeds, you can stop their hearts. For decades, the West has used agricultural aid and patented inputs as a silent weapon of mass compliance. It works like this. The World Bank or the IMF provides a loan, but that loan comes with structural adjustments. These adjustments often require African nations to rewrite their seed laws to protect foreign patents. Once the law is changed, the infiltration begins. Local seeds are marginalized, and the country becomes a captive market. Now, here's the connection to the US dollar. These seeds and the chemicals required to grow them must often be purchased in international markets using hard currency. And this creates a perpetual demand for the dollar and ensures that African wealth is constantly being siphoned off to service Western intellectual property. By breaking this cycle, Ibrahim Traoré isn't just planting crops. He is conducting a full-scale de-dollarization of the African stomach. Washington is alarmed because they know that the mask has slipped. They realize that if Burkina Faso succeeds, the seed dollar system collapses across the entire Sahel. If the farmers in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso no longer need to buy patented seeds from Western giants, they no longer need the high-interest loans to pay for them. If they don't need the loans, the IMF loses its leverage. This is the nightmare scenario for the architects of the old guard. Yet they have used food as a bargaining chip in every major negotiation since the end of the colonial era. Agree to our military base, or we will withhold the agricultural technology you need to feed your people. That was the unspoken threat. Traoré has just called their bluff. He is proving that the modern science they sold us was actually a leash. When you look at the $900 million seed law through this lens, you realize it is a structural shift in the balance of global power. It is the agricultural equivalent of a nation suddenly deciding to trade oil in its own currency. It challenges the very foundation of how the West manages the global South. The West is terrified that this virus of sovereignty will spread. If Africa can reclaim its seeds, what stops it from reclaiming its uranium, its gold, its data? The leverage that has been used to keep the continent in a state of managed poverty is evaporating. The analysts at the Pentagon and the State Department aren't worried about the yield of African sorghum. They are worried about the yield of African independence. Let's be real. The old guard in neighboring countries like Nigeria are watching this with fear because they are still deep in the pocket of the biotech lobby. They are cooked because they have built their entire agricultural policy on a foundation of foreign dependence. But the people on the streets see it differently. They see that the global chess game is finally being played by a master who isn't afraid to flip the board. Traoré understands that true power isn't given. It is grown from the ground up. Yet this $900 million is an investment in a future where Africa doesn't have to check the exchange rate of the dollar before it can afford to plant a field. It is a declaration that our soil is not for sale, and our seeds are not a licensed product of a foreign empire. The era of the seed dollar is under siege, and the walls of the corporate fortress are starting to crumble. The Western corporate machine has spent billions of dollars on a single, powerful marketing lie: that high yield is the only metric of success. They show you charts and graphs of hybrid corn and GMO soy, claiming that these laboratory miracles are the only way to feed the world. But this is a classic case of gaslighting the global South. Their science is designed for profit, not for people. It is a high-ceiling, low-floor model. In a perfect year, also with perfect rain and a suitcase full of expensive chemicals, these seeds produce a massive harvest. But the moment a drought hits, or the supply chain for fertilizer breaks down, the floor disappears, the crop dies, and the farmer is left with nothing but a mountain of debt. This isn't agriculture. It's a high-stakes casino where the house, the Western corporation, always wins, and the African farmer always loses. Ibrahim Traoré's $900 million investment is building something different: the resilient floor. This is the return to indigenous science. Unlike the fragile hybrids from the West, our local millet, sorghum, and fonio have been engineered by nature and our ancestors over thousands of years to survive the harshest conditions on Earth. They don't need a specialized chemical cocktail to grow. Now, they don't need a patent license to germinate. They know the soil of the Sahel because they were born from it. While the Western model focuses on the maximum possible profit in a good year, Traoré is focusing on the maximum possible survival in a bad year. Let's look at a woman we will call Awa. For years, Awa followed the advice of the old guard and the foreign NGOs. She took out a loan to buy the improved seeds. She spent her days worrying about the price of imported fertilizer. One season, the rains were late by just 2 weeks. Her high-tech crops withered and turned to dust. She couldn't save the seeds for next year because they were sterile. She was cooked. The loan officer didn't care about the drought. He only cared about the signature on the contract. Awa was trapped in a cycle of poverty that was dressed up as modernization. But this year, under the new seed law, Awa's village cooperative received seeds from the new National Seed Bank, the varieties her grandmother used to plant. The yield might not break records on a spreadsheet in Brussels, but here is the truth. The cost of her inputs dropped by 80%. She didn't need to borrow money from a bank that answers to Washington. When the heat wave came, her local millet didn't die. It waited. It survived. At harvest time, Awa didn't have a loan officer waiting at her gate. She had a full granary and her dignity. This is what the West calls backwards. They call it low-tech because they can't monetize it. They can't put a barcode on a seed that a farmer saves in a clay pot. Yes, they hate this model because it makes the African farmer invisible to their financial systems. Indigenous science is the ultimate form of resistance because it is decentralized and sovereign. It moves the power from the laboratory in St. Louis back to the kitchen table in a Sahelian village. The $900 million is funding the laboratories that will refine these local varieties, not to make them dependent on chemicals, but to make them even more resilient. We are not going back to the past. We are taking the best of our history to build a future that the West cannot control. The resilient floor is our insurance policy against a world that has proven it doesn't care if we eat as long as we pay. Traoré has realized that a nation is only as strong as its most vulnerable farmer, and by giving Awa her seeds back, and he has given Burkina Faso its freedom. The empire doesn't always come with tanks and airstrikes. In the 21st century, the front line of neo-colonialism is found in the newsrooms of London, the editorial offices in Paris, and the sterile conference rooms of the world's leading credit rating agencies. When Ibrahim Traoré signed that $900 million seed law, he didn't just trigger a policy shift. He triggered an international gaslight campaign. Suddenly, the same institutions that watched in silence while our farmers drowned in debt began to scream about food security and economic stability. They aren't worried that we will starve. They are terrified that we will stop paying them for the privilege of eating. Let's look at how the empire strikes back. First comes the media warfare. If you look at the headlines from the BBC, Le Monde, or Jeune Afrique, a pattern emerges. They don't call it seed sovereignty. They call it policy uncertainty. They don't call it protecting indigenous science. They call it an anti-science regression. This is classic psychological warfare. They use the language of concern to mask their greed. They flood the airwaves with experts, from biotech-funded think tanks who warn that without patented Western seeds, Burkina Faso will face a catastrophic harvest. This is the same Green Revolution lie repackaged for a new generation. Traoré has spotted this manipulation and called it out for what it is: imperialist propaganda. He has suspended these outlets not because he fears the truth, but because he refuses to let foreign interests incite chaos and demonize the will of the people. Then comes the financial blackmail. Notice how, shortly after the law was passed, the credit rating agencies, the high priests of the global financial system, quietly placed Burkina Faso on a watch list. They cite institutional risks and unpredictable governance. What they really mean is that Traoré is no longer predictable for their investors. In the global chess game, the rating agencies are the enforcers. They tell the world that a country is risky, not because its people are lazy, but because its leader refuses to sell its soil to the highest bidder. They use these ratings to justify cutting off credit and discouraging foreign direct investment. It is a white-collar siege designed to starve the revolution out of existence. But the most insidious tactic is the scientific gaslighting. Organizations like the Gates-funded AGRA push a narrative that African farmers are incapable of developing their own solutions. They use their billions to lobby for laws that favor harmonized seed trade, a code phrase for removing every barrier that protects local farmers from corporate takeover. They present themselves as philanthropists, but they are the architects of our dependency. They claim that climate change demands more of their patented technology, when in reality, it is their uniform, input-heavy model that has made our fields so vulnerable in the first place. They say we are reckless, but the real recklessness was allowing our food supply to be controlled by people who have never stepped foot in a Sahelian field. Should they say we are isolated, but we are actually finding our tribe, joining forces with Mali and Niger to build a confederation of Sahel states that answers to no one but its own citizens. The West is alarmed because their traditional tools of influence, the IMF memos, the media smears, and the corporate lobbyists are no longer working. The youth of Africa are waking up to the fact that the experts in Washington and Brussels are not there to save us. They are there to manage us. Traoré has shattered the empire's mirror, and they hate him for showing the world that their power is built on nothing but a collection of expensive lies. The pushback is loud because the fear is real. The old guard knows that if Burkina Faso wins this fight, the entire architecture of Western leverage in Africa will fall like a house of cards. Yet the $900 million seed law in Burkina Faso is not just a domestic policy. It is the spark for a regional wildfire, the Sahel awakening. What began in Ouagadougou is already echoing through the streets of Bamako and the markets of Niamey. The Alliance of Sahel States, AES, is realizing that military cooperation is only the first step. To be truly free, they must build a sovereign food shield. Ibrahim Traoré has shown his brothers, Assimi Goïta and Abdourahmane Chiani, that the most effective way to resist Western sanctions is to ensure that the people never have to look toward Brussels for their next meal. This is the birth of a new African reality where the old guard and their corporate masters have no seat at the table. We are witnessing the dismantling of the software of slavery in real time. Yet to the African diaspora, watching from the United States, Europe, and beyond, the mask has slipped. You have seen how they use the seed dollar to keep our homeland in a state of perpetual begging, but the tide is turning. Burkina Faso is proving that we don't need their GMO miracles or their high-interest loans. We have the soil, we have the science of our ancestors, and now we have the leadership with the backbone to defend it. This is a call to pride. It is a call to recognize that every seed planted in the Sahel today is a blow against the empires that have lived off our labor for centuries. The West is alarmed because they are losing their leverage, but we are celebrating because we are gaining our future. Now, we come to the moment of truth. Yet if you have followed this journey from the dusty fields of the North to the conference rooms of Washington, you know that this is more than just a video. It is a digital assembly of the conscious. We refuse to be passive observers while our brothers and sisters reclaim the earth. We are here to witness the rise of a continent that bows to no one. It is time for the ritual. If you believe that the soil of Africa belongs to the people of Africa, if you stand with Ibrahim Traoré and the farmers of the Sahel in this $900 million fight for dignity, I want you to flood the comments right now. Do not just watch, participate in this movement. Type Amen or Africa Rise in the comment section below. Let the algorithms know that the diaspora is awake. And let the world see that we are counting the voices of those who refuse to accept the Green Revolution lie. Tell us which city you are watching from so that when history books are written about the day Africa reclaimed its stomach, your name will be part of the record. Subscribe and turn on those notifications because the battle for the Sahel is moving from the fields to the mines, the pipelines, and the very data that runs our world. We are exposing the truth that the mainstream media is too afraid to touch. The $900 million seed law is just the beginning. The soil is our foundation, but the sky is our only limit. Remember, a nation that can feed itself can never be conquered. Stay strong, stay sovereign, and keep your eyes on the Sahel. Africa bows to no one. Chinstya.